Joining me now is best-selling author of groundbreaking works including The War on the West and The Madness of Crowds. He's also associate editor of The Spectator, Douglas Murray, looking superb tonight. Thank you very much. Douglas, let's start with some rewriting of history right now. We've got Justin Trudeau claiming he never mandated COVID-19 vaccines. Our own former PM here made similar claims. And now the man behind so much of the COVID response dysfunction, Anthony Fauci, well, he appears to have gone from a figure of worship to derision very quickly.
Yes, that's right, Rita. I think people are trying to rewrite history as we speak, or as they speak at any rate. Justin Trudeau is, I think, the most egregious political example of that. Anthony Fauci this week said that he might have got some things wrong by sort of pushing too hard on the vaccines. But effectively, all he did was say, possibly I made a strategic mistake. As you say, in Australia, some political pushback on this. But the most egregious example, I think, is from Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau, of all Western leaders, I think maybe you could say that the unmissed Jacinda Ardern was almost as bad. But Justin Trudeau actually told Canadians, you know, I'm not sure we can live with these fellow citizens who don't agree to take their fifth shot. He talked in dehumanizing terms about fellow Canadians, and now he is pretending that none of that happened. I cannot think of a time in my life when a politician in such a senior role has tried to memory hole things they said almost yesterday. It is quite scandalous, and I hope that the Canadian voting public, for once, actually notice this lie.
He was absolutely terrible. You're right, in demonising his own citizens, in dehumanising them, in portraying them as extremists, as dangerous, as racist if they wanted their freedoms. And we saw how he treated that truckers' convoy. And sadly, Douglas, the media joined in. The media was there with him, lockstep, every step of the way.
That's right. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to point this out a little while ago whilst in a debate in Toronto. The mainstream media in Canada acted as the amen chorus of Justin Trudeau. They joined in every single thing he did. Now, normally when a prime minister says, I'm not sure that these sort of Untermensch able to be lived with, the media would regard that as being sort of extremist language and interrogate the prime minister. They didn't. They went for the truckers. Normally, when people are chucked out of the banking system, as people in Canada were, debanked, effectively their lives completely destroyed.
Yes.
The media would be on the side of the people who or at least would be asking questions about how on earth this had happened, the people it was happening to. And again, the Canadian media didn't. They all acted as the amen chorus of the Trudeau government. Well, one reason is that in Canada, the mainstream media is funded by the government. And I made this point on a very major stage in Canada, in Toronto in November. And it didn't surprise me at all that although it made a lot of noise online, none of the Canadian media reported on the event in question. There's a totally corrupt system going on in Canada. My own view is that if Vladimir Putin hadn't have invaded Ukraine the February before last, people would have noticed this a bit more. But little Justin got away with his little mini nasty dictatorial coup in Canada. And unfortunately, he's getting away with it still. As I say, I hope he doesn't continue to do so.
Now, you've written an excellent piece for the UK Telegraph on America's cities descending into anarchy. You argue that from crime to these climate protesters, it's all a result of not upholding the law. You, well, incentivise more lawlessness, and we can expect to see that trend occurring in other big cities in the West, not just in America.
Yes, that's right. In the UK, it's now perfectly possible to have an allegedly peaceful protest which is protected by the police and which takes place in, the middle of a motorway. Or in the middle of a massive highway or to roundabouts at a junction, that means that ordinary people can't go to work. And the police protect the protesters, saying, oh, no, it's extremely important that if you're disrupting everyone's livelihood in the name of climate change, you've got to be allowed to do so. And if any member of the public gets out of their car or van and says, excuse me, I've got work to do, then you should threaten that member of the public with arrest and breach of the peace. I say that kind of inversion of the law, that defense of the people who are actually breaking the law, and the criminalization of the ordinary members of the public who want to go about their lives is something I've seen happening in American cities. And I'm seeing it happen in Britain and other countries in the West as well. It's incredibly important that this kind of disintegration and denigration that's gone on across American cities does not spread. You either have a law, a set of laws, or you don't. And if you don't, then it's a free-for-all. And all sorts of maniacs will tread into that space.
We're seeing a similar trend right here in Melbourne and other Australian cities as well. Now, we spoke a couple of weeks ago about King Charles wanting an investigation of his family's links to slavery and even being open to the idea of reparations. Well, The Guardian is now excitedly reporting that direct ancestors of King Charles owned slave plantations. Oh, my goodness, that's according to some documents. Sounds very serious, Douglas, but as author Tom Holland reminded The Guardian, direct ancestors of King Charles had people hanged almost to the point of death, cut down, castrated, disemboweled, beheaded, cut into quarters and stuck on spikes. History ain't pretty, Douglas.
That's right. I'm so glad that my friend Tom Holland pointed this out. It's sort of hilarious, isn't it? If you're going to go back in history and start this sort of thing, the British monarchy goes back almost 1,000 years. Life wasn't always as it is in Melbourne or London in the 21st century. You know, it was quite rough around the edges at times. Our own age has decided to interrogate the past through the lens of racism and slavery and colonialism. But we could just as easily find all of those poor people who were involved in Catholic plots, for instance, in the 16th century and were hanged, drawn and quartered, as Tom Holland mentions, and find their descendants and ask King Charles to pay some kind of reparations to them. Their ancestors really suffered, you know, Rita. And there'll doubtless have been battles. I mean, some kings in medieval times probably were involved in battles. And Rita, I'm sorry to tell you, but not all of those battles were entirely pacifist affairs. And we could go on endlessly in this vein. It's stupid. It's silly. Everybody knows it is. The past happened. And the idea of relitigating it or trying to make amends for it in the present is absolutely imbecilic. I do hope our era gets to that point soon.
It is so imbecilic, but King Charles is entertaining this. He's open to it. He wants to know more about the family's links to slavery. It seems we will be hearing more about this for the time being. Now, I'm keen to get your perspective on the late, great Barry Humphries. We lost an absolute comic genius. And we have to acknowledge that the miserable malcontents of the Melbourne International Comedy Festival tried to cancel this man. He was one of their founders, and they still tried to cancel him for supposedly transphobic comments. But his work lives on in thousands of clips like this one. Here is Barry Humphries as Dame Edna talking to Canadian songstress Katie Lang, who at the time was probably the most famous lesbian in the world.
I'm going to talk about something personal. This could offend people. I'm never one to run away from confrontations. I don't think there's anything that two intelligent women cannot discuss. There's no taboo. I make no apologies for the words, for the terminology, perhaps the coarse terminology that I'm going to use now. When did you first know you were Canadian? I mean, I mean that.
Douglas, we have lost a comic great, not only a genius, but brave. He never backed away. He never apologised. He never tried to appease the haters. He kept doing comedy and kept doing it bravely.
I really do think he was the funniest man who ever lived. I was just a huge fan from the first time I was aware of him. I was lucky enough to know him a little and meet him at events and others, and we had mutual friends. And he was as funny in private as he was in public. I saw him perform many times in public, and as I saw him in the role of Dame Edna in particular, just mowing down the front rows of the audience, I remember on one occasion in America sliding down my seat and almost underneath the seat in front, thinking, I can't believe people can put up with it. He just was, he was brave, he was hilarious, he was naturally funny, he was just a wizard of technique as a comedian, an unbelievably cultured man as well, unbelievably well-read. You say he also just stuck by his principles. These people in the Melbourne Festival, they'll be forgotten. They already are. Barry Humphries, I think, will never be forgotten as long as people want to laugh. I'll never forget that in the dying months of another great Australian and a great friend of mine, Clive James, I remember telling Clive that I had just seen Barry Humphries in a restaurant. I had gone over to him to say hello, and I'd said, "Oh, Barry, I was just in Australia, and I thought he'd be interested." And we talked about that for a bit. And I said, as a result, of course, I was very sorry I wasn't able to come to see your latest show. And that deadly, deadly thing happened in his eyes. And he looked at me and he said, "Yes, almost cancelled when we heard." And I remember thinking I was going to die. And I remember telling Clive about this, and Clive said, "Oh, Douglas, Barry has thousands of those up his sleeve. He's absolutely lethal." He was far more than a comedian. He was a great genius and a member of a generation of great Australians. And I really do think it's important to say this, because there's really, from that generation, there's only one left, which is Germaine Greer. But a generation of great Australians who left Australia, went round the world, often had some complex relationship back home with their homeland, but who made Australia proud, I think. People who were of extraordinary erudition and culture and wit and wisdom. And I think that was an extraordinary generation. Any country would be proud of them, and Australia should be deeply proud of the sons and daughters that she produced in those years.
Well said. Douglas Murray, absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.